Hi, my name is Janique, and today I'll be doing a live chapter reading from 5 Alarm Christmas by Melinda Valentine, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Finley. Finley pulled her coat tighter across her body as she walked the half block to Mike's Tavern for a much-needed drink, not to mention some peace and quiet from her loud, opinionated family. She loved them more than anything, but the holidays tended to be the perfect time to hound Finley on why she still hadn't settled down with a nice young man. When was she giving her parents grandbabies? Blah, blah, blah. They never hounded her brothers. Those three could do whatever they wanted, and their parents knew better than to ask about babies. The only way they were going to get a grandchild from one of them would be if it happened on accident. Now that everyone settled down for the night, it was a good opportunity for her to relax a bit. She was nursing her first beer when her eyes locked on a guy at the other end of the bar. He was yelling at the television. She glanced at the screen to see what sport he was watching. Only it wasn't sports at all. It was some sort of political show. She giggled. He was cute. His dirty blonde hair was cut close to his scalp. He wore a simple black t-shirt and a pair of dark jeans. He was ordering another beer when his eyes found hers. It was too dark to see their color from where she stood, but she was mesmerized nonetheless. The beer bottle stopped an inch from his lips. He seemed just as entranced as she was. She gave him a smile. He returned it with a bright, playful grin. This night was going better than she had imagined. He stood there watching as she drank her beer, the television no longer of any importance. She liked that. Someone sat down next to her. She glimpsed over at the man on the next bar stool. He nodded his greeting. "Hey, what's up?" She gave him a small smile. "Hi." She looked for the man across the bar, but he was gone. The guy next to her was kind of cute, but he had nothing on the man who had now vanished. Disappointment washed over her. She was having a good time, silently flirting with the stranger. Suddenly, arms encased her shoulders. She quickly turned her head as the sexy stranger she had been looking for planted a kiss on her temple. He smiled mischievously. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart. I'm sure Greg and Sue will understand. Are you ready then?" "Definitely." Finley followed him outside. He reached behind his back for her hand. She placed hers in his, and they practically ran to his car. He pulled her body close next to what she assumed was his car in the parking lot. Her heart raced, and yet she felt calm. Blue. His eyes were blue, and they burned into her. She couldn't wait one more minute to feel his lips on her. She went on her tiptoes and kissed him, gently yet firm. His kiss seared. He kissed her like a man who knew his way around a woman's body. She couldn't wait to find out if she was right. His hands squeezed her hips as she clutched the front of his coat. He ended the kiss far too soon for her liking and opened the car door for her. After she was seated, he shut the door and ran around the front of his car to the driver's side. He folded his large frame inside and slipped his hands behind her head, stealing another breathtaking kiss before putting the car in drive. Gravel crunched under the tires as he drove them away from the tavern. They arrived at an apartment complex only a mile or two away. Neither of them had said a word to each other since they left. For her, she was afraid the magic of the moment would be broken. There was something uniquely erotic about their encounter, and yet familiar at the same time. She didn't want that to end any time soon. They both knew what they were there for. Words were unnecessary. They walked up to his apartment on the second floor together. Finley stood next to him as he unlocked the door. She hoped he didn't have a roommate. She didn't want to have to make small talk with anyone right now. He ushered her to pass through, closing the door behind them. Once inside, he stood perfectly still behind her. The anticipation of his touch was overwhelming. What was he doing? She didn't dare turn to look at him. She didn't want to discover what he was waiting for. She was enjoying every torturous moment of the unknown. Finally, his fingertips brushed her hair away from the nape of her neck. His lips caressed the tender skin from her ear to her shoulder. With a thud, her purse hit the floor. He pushed her coat off of her shoulders. It puddled on the floor around her feet. His hands traveled down her sides. The back of his knuckles brushed her bare skin as they slipped under the hem of her shirt. The rough pads scratched her skin deliciously as he pulled her shirt over her head, tossing it to the floor. This was a man that worked with his hands. She couldn't wait to see what he could do with them. He spun her around so quickly she almost lost her balance. That would have been embarrassing. She hadn't even had much to drink. With a sexy grin, he bowed his head to kiss her. She leaned into him, eager to reciprocate the burning kiss with one of her own. He lifted her legs around his hips with ease, walking them through the house. He never released her lips. Once they were in the bedroom, he set Finley on her feet and spun her around. Once again, she faced away from him. Not being able to anticipate his next move was a huge turn-on. He reached around and unbuttoned her jeans. He yanked them down to her ankles, taking her soaked panties with them. The sexy stranger slipped his hand between her thighs. He touched everywhere except where she really wanted him to. Her thighs, her ass, and her belly got all the attention. Lazily, he swirled patterns on her skin. Sweet mother of mercy, she couldn't take much more. His fingertips brushed across her pussy ever so gently. A whimper slipped from her throat. He guided her to lean over the bed as he plunged his finger inside her. A gasp of pleasure escaped her lips. He moved his hand with such precision she knew it wouldn't take long before she lost herself in his touch. She was at the brink when he withdrew his hand. Her body ached to be finished. "Stay," he commanded. That only turned her on more. She was not an obedient woman at all. For some unknown reason, she wanted to be. She could hear him moving around, but she didn't dare move. She lay there, her feet on the floor and her ass in the air. She almost became unhinged when she heard the familiar sound of a condom wrapper. Butterflies invaded her stomach. With one hand on her hip, holding her still, he entered her. His strokes were long and hard. Her knees hit the side of the bed with such force she was certain she'd have a bruise. She loved every minute. She felt that familiar sensation beginning to build. As if sensing her need, his speed increased. She let out a cry. She came loudly. He kissed her shoulder blades before pulling out. He spun her around again, only this time to face him. He smiled. I'm just getting started. He playfully pushed her back onto the bed. A giggle escaped her lips. He crawled up her body until he was even with her face and once again entered her in one slow thrust. Everything else faded away into the background of the skilled man as the skilled man made her forget the realities of life for a while. Finley woke suddenly to the soft sound of snoring next to her. Her eyes tried to adjust to the unfamiliar room. The moonlight illuminated the room just enough for her to make out the guy lying there. Her sexy stranger was on his back, mouth slightly open, with the sheet barely covering a very impressive male body. It was still dark out. The digital clock on the nightstand read just before 7 in the morning. She slipped out of bed quietly. She tiptoed through the room naked, gathering her strewn clothes before heading out to the living room. She found the rest of her belongings and quickly got dressed. Buttoning up her coat, she slipped out of the apartment and out into the cold. She was approximately 2 miles from her parents' house. Not an ideal walk in her heeled boots, but no way would she waste money on a cab that would wake everyone up and rat herself out. She'd take stealth over comfort in this matter any day. She was halfway back to her parents' house when the first snowflakes began to fall. It was almost magical, walking home in the wee hours of the morning with no one else on the streets and snow swirling all around her. Had she been in a movie, this was where she would burst into a song about love and dance in the streets. Instead, she walked on. No one wanted to hear her sing anyway. Finley picked up her pace because, as magical as it was still cold as shit, and her toes were getting numb. By the time she eased the key into her parents' back door, her nose was cold and her hair was soaked. She felt like a teenager sneaking in after missing curfew all over again. She followed the familiar path to her childhood bedroom. She cleaned up in her bathroom before snuggling down under the covers. At last, she would get a few hours' sleep before she had to put on a happy face for the annual Christmas party at the Red House. It was going to be a long day.